A kingdom in ashes. The smoke of burning villages clung to the sky like a funeral shroud. All across the land of the Saxons, from the winding Thames to the broken halls of Mercia, the great heathen army spread ruin. Homes were torched, churches torn down, families scattered into the woods like frightened deer. England was being devoured. And at the heart of this storm stood Alfred, King of Wessex, young, weary, and already battered by a war he had not chosen. He had been crowned in a world already on fire, his brothers dead before him, and now his fragile kingdom was the last unconquered piece of Anglo-Saxon England. The Viking warlords did not fear him. They believed the Saxons would break as all the others had. Alfred's army was small, his lands poor, and his health fragile. He had long suffered agonies of the stomach, and many nights he bent double in pain when he should have been leading his men. But Alfred's weakness was not the kind his enemies understood. For in Alfred there burned the peculiar stubbornness of humankind, the refusal to accept what seemed inevitable. The first great clash had been a disaster. His FYRD, the levy of farmers and craftsmen who fought with spears and shields, had crumbled against the Viking onslaught. The long-haired Danes, hardened by years of raiding and conquest, smashed the Saxon lines like waves against fragile wood. Alfred fought among his men, shield raised, sword arm aching, until the cry to retreat tore across the battlefield. By nightfall, the enemy held the field. Wessex was broken, and Alfred fled into the marshes with only a handful of companions. The crown of England, it seemed, was gone. For weeks, Alfred vanished from the eyes of friend and foe alike. To the people, it was said the king had abandoned them. Rumors spread that he had taken ship, fleeing across the sea as so many others had. Some even whispered he was dead. But Alfred was not dead. He was alive, slogging through mud and mire in the desolate marshlands of Somerset, where reeds grew thick and mist rose from the water at dawn. There, stripped of wealth, throne, and army, Alfred learned the first truth of survival, that a king was not his crown, nor his hall, nor even his warriors. A king was his will. Hunger gnawed at them. More than once Alfred went without food so that his men might eat. He slept on damp furs, his body shaking from cold and illness. He was not treated as royalty, not then. Once, a peasant woman, not knowing who he was, asked him to watch her bread as it baked over the fire. Alfred, lost in thought, let it burn, and she scolded him sharply. He bowed his head, humiliated, but took the rebuke in silence. Even kings could err, even kings could be humbled. Yet humiliation did not destroy him. It shaped him. In the swamps, Alfred found something stronger than armies: perspective. He saw his people not as subjects to be ruled, but as kin to be saved. The peasants who shared their bread, the hunters who gave shelter, the fishermen who taught him the ways of the marsh, these were England, as much as any crown or coronation. It was there, in the mud and shadows, that Alfred's resolve hardened into something the Danes could not comprehend. They thought him beaten. They thought him finished. But Alfred carried within him that uniquely human gift, the ability to suffer, to endure, and to rise again. When his men looked at him, hollow-eyed and half-starved, they saw not a king in exile but a leader who still believed. He told them that the fight was not over, that England was not lost, that so long as one Saxon man could raise a shield, the land still lived. His words were not shouted from gilded thrones or great halls. They were spoken in whispers, by fires no bigger than a fist, to soldiers who had nothing left but faith. And slowly, that faith became strength. The kingdom lay in ashes. But in Alfred's heart, and in the hearts of those who followed him into the bogs and wastelands, a spark smoldered. A spark that refused to die. And sparks, however small, can ignite flames strong enough to burn back the dark. The king in the marshes. The marshes of Somerset were no place for a king. Cold water seeped into boots, mist clung to every reed, and the air reeked of rot and brine. Yet here, in this forgotten corner of England, Alfred made his stand. Not with armies, not with banners, but with survival. By day, he and his men trudged through waist-deep bogs, searching for fish or snaring birds. By night, they huddled around meager fires, smoke curling upward in thin, betrayed lines that risked giving away their camp. Hunger gnawed at them all, but Alfred bore it without complaint. A king could not ask of his men what he himself would not endure. He was no longer Alfred the king. He was Alfred the outcast, Alfred the fugitive, Alfred who once let bread burn on a poor woman's hearth. That moment of humiliation stayed with him, the scolding of a weary peasant wife who knew nothing of crowns or battles. It should have crushed him. Instead, it tempered him. For the first time, Alfred understood fully. England was not the throne in Winchester, nor the gold in the treasury, nor the nobles who shifted loyalties with the wind. England was the people who had nothing but the land beneath their feet, the farmers, the fishermen, the wives and children who waited in fear of the next Viking raid. If he were to be king, he would be king for them. Word spread quietly that Alfred still lived. A shepherd boy whispered it to his kin. A tanner carried it to his village. A priest, hiding relics from the invaders, murmured it as a prayer. The flame of hope, small and flickering, traveled from mouth to mouth across the land. The Danes thought Alfred broken, yet his very survival defied them. Still, survival was not enough. To reclaim England, Alfred needed more than faith. He needed strategy. In the damp stillness of the marsh, he began to dream of a new kind of war. The Vikings fought with brute strength and sudden fury, crashing through villages before Saxon levies could gather. To match them, Alfred would need to change the rules. He spoke to his men in hushed tones. "We cannot fight them in open fields, not yet. We strike where they are weak. We build what they cannot take. We turn every farmer into a soldier, every village into a fortress." They listened, weary but willing. For what choice did they have? The land was burning. The Danes offered only submission. Alfred offered resistance, however desperate. Slowly, his plan took shape. He would summon his lords in secret. He would call forth the FYRD again, not as scattered farmers but as disciplined companies. And most daring of all, he would build fortified strongholds scattered across Wessex, places where his people could rally, resist, and refuse to yield. The marsh became more than refuge. It became a war room. Messengers slipped out under cover of night, carrying Alfred's summons across hostile ground. Each one risked capture and death, but each one went willingly, for in Alfred's eyes they saw something their enemies lacked: conviction. The Danes had numbers, wealth, and fury. Alfred had only faith and fire. But faith and fire, he knew, could outlast steel. Days stretched into weeks. The men grew leaner, but their spirits hardened. Saith, one of his thanes, said it plainly one night. "My lord, we are fewer than a hunting party. But when I look at you, I think we are enough." Alfred did not answer. He only stared into the flames, thinking of his father, his brothers, and the countless graves already sown into England's soil. Enough. No. But perhaps enough to begin. When at last word came back from the lords, hope swelled. Some had bent knee to the Danes, but others, enough, answered Alfred's call. They would meet him when he emerged from exile, when he raised his banner once more. The king who had once burned bread now plotted to forge a nation. The marshes, cruel and bitter, had not destroyed him. They had remade him. And when Alfred stepped from the mist, it would not be as a fugitive. It would be as England's last chance. The return of the king. Spring broke over the marshes with a silence that felt like promise. The reeds whispered in the breeze, the waters grew warmer, and with the thaw came word that the lords of Wessex were stirring. Alfred's summons, carried by secret messengers, had not been in vain. His people were waiting for him. The Danes believed the Saxons crushed, yet in every village the truth had taken root. Their king lived. Their king endured. And when he returned, they would rise with him. Alfred emerged from the bogs lean and scarred, but his eyes were steady, lit with a flame of purpose. He was no longer the fugitive king, skulking from hut to hut. He was the man who had shared the hunger of his people, the man who had slept on reeds and tasted exile. He knew now that a crown was not a gift of birth, but a burden carried through suffering. His first steps out of the marshes led to Egbert Stone, a great rock standing lonely in the green fields of Wiltshire. There, by ancient custom, men would gather to answer the call of their lord. Alfred stood before it, his banner, a simple white cross on a field of blue, fluttering in the wind. At first, only a few came: hunters, farmers, weary survivors. Then came bands of thanes, armored in chain and iron, shields on their backs. More arrived each day, a tide of resolve swelling from every corner of Wessex. They came with rusted spears, with sharpened hoes, with whatever they could wield. And when they saw Alfred alive, their weary faces kindled with something brighter than fear, hope. The king walked among them, speaking not as a ruler above his subjects, but as one of them. "You have lost homes," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You have buried kin. You have seen the smoke of your villages rise to the heavens. The Danes would have us believe we are broken. But we are not broken. We endure. We fight. And as long as we stand together, England yet lives." A cheer thundered across the fields. Men raised their spears, women wept, children clung to their mothers' skirts, staring wide-eyed at the king who had come back from the swamp like a figure from legend. The FYRD of Wessex was reborn. But Alfred knew raw courage was not enough. To defeat the Vikings, he needed discipline. So he drilled his men, teaching them to hold the line, to fight in the shield wall as one body. He placed his strongest in the front, steadied the weak in the center, and spread veterans among the fresh recruits so that no man felt alone. He spoke of Buzz, fortified towns that would stand against raids, places where their families could shelter while they fought. This was not a war to win in a single clash, he told them. It was a war of endurance. The Danes must be made to bleed again and again, until their fury turned to weariness. Still, Alfred promised them more than mere survival. He promised victory. The call to arms spread like fire. From Dorset and Somerset, from Wiltshire and Hampshire, the Saxons came. They marched beneath rough banners, carrying their faith in their king like a shield. At Egbert's Stone they became not scattered survivors, but an army. The Danes soon heard the rumor: Alfred lived. Guthrum, the Viking warlord, sneered at the news. To him, Alfred was no threat, a sickly king with a rabble of farmers. But pride can blind even the strongest. While Guthrum dismissed him, Alfred's army grew stronger by the day. At last, Alfred judged the time had come. He led his men across the rolling hills to the plains near Eddington, where Guthrum's host camped, swollen with plunder and arrogance. There, Alfred would face his enemy not as a hunted fugitive, but as the true king of Wessex. The night before battle, he walked among his men. Some sharpened swords, others prayed by candlelight. Alfred stopped often, kneeling beside them, speaking quiet words. "Tomorrow we stand not for me, but for every soul who calls this land home. If we fail, there will be no England left to save. If we prevail, our children will know freedom." The men gripped their weapons tighter. Fear remained, but it was bound now with iron will. When dawn came, the sun spilled gold across the fields, glinting off spearheads and helmets. Alfred stood at the front, sword in hand, his banner rising above the shield wall. He looked upon his people, farmers turned soldiers, peasants turned warriors, and felt pride swell in his chest. The king had returned. The people had risen. And England was ready to fight for its life. Fire and crown. The fields near Eddington lay shrouded in mist when the armies formed. On one side, Alfred and the FYRD of Wessex, farmers, hunters, smiths and thanes, all bound together in a single shield wall. On the other, Guthrum and his Danes, a host of hardened raiders with axes gleaming and war cries echoing across the hills. The Saxons were fewer. The Danes had plunder and reputation on their side. Yet Alfred's men stood without flinching, their shields locked, their breath misting in the cold morning air. The memory of burned villages and slain kin gave them strength. Alfred rode slowly along the front of his line, his sword lifted, his voice carrying through the stillness. "Men of England, today we fight not for riches, not for crowns, but for home. Behind us lies our land, our wives, our children. If we fall, there is nothing left. If we stand, England stands with us." The cheer that rose shook the earth. Spears thumped against shields. Courage surged like blood through the line. Then the Vikings roared, and the clash began. The Danes charged, a storm of iron and fury, axes biting into wood, spears darting forward. The Saxon shield wall groaned under the impact, but it held. Alfred's men pressed shoulder to shoulder, shields braced, swords stabbing through the gaps. Each man fought not alone, but as part of the wall, a living fortress of flesh and oak. For hours the battle raged. The shield walls slammed together, broke, and reformed. Blood slicked the grass, Cries of pain mingled with the clash of steel. The Danes pressed hard, but every time they thought the Saxons would break, Alfred's voice rose above the chaos, steady and unyielding. "Hold the line! Stand, men of Wessex!" And they did. They stood. The Danes tried again and again to smash through. Guthrum himself strode into the fray, his axe cutting men down like wheat. Yet Alfred was everywhere, shouting orders, raising fallen shields, striking when the moment came. He was not merely a king that day. He was the will of his people made flesh. At last, when exhaustion weighed heavy on both sides, Alfred gave the order. The Saxon horn sounded, and the shield wall surged forward as one. With a thunderous shout, they pushed into the Viking ranks, driving them back step by bloody step. Farmers, who had once only known plows, now thrust spears into hardened raiders. Smiths who had once shaped iron now shattered it. Every strike was fueled by memory, of homes burned, of families lost, of a land on the edge of ruin. The Danes faltered. Their fury met something stronger, a people who refused to surrender. By dusk, Guthrum's host was broken. The survivors fled to their camp, only to find Alfred's men surrounding them. Hunger and fear gnawed at the invaders. Guthrum, the warlord who had boasted of owning England, now found himself trapped like a beast in a cage. He had no choice. He surrendered. For the first time, the Viking tide had been stopped. Wessex still lived. England still lived. But Alfred's victory was not only won with the sword. When Guthrum bent knee, Alfred showed him not cruelty, but mercy. He demanded the Danes withdraw, and he asked something more, that Guthrum accept baptism and peace. To the surprise of many, the warlord agreed. Guthrum was christened with Alfred himself as godfather. It was a triumph not of conquest, but of survival. The fires of Edington marked more than a battlefield. They marked the birth of an idea, that England could endure, that it could rise from ashes and hardship, bound not only by kings but by the stubborn spirit of its people. In years to come, Alfred would fortify Wessex with buzz, schools, and laws. He would earn the name Alfred the Great. But in that moment, standing on the blood-soaked field, crown in one hand and sword in the other, he was something simpler, something greater. He was the man who refused to surrender. The king who chose his people over despair. The forgotten sovereign who stood against the storm and saved England. And through him, humankind proved once more the truth that no invader, no matter how fierce, can crush. When humans fight not for power, but for one another, they are unstoppable.